From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. A report last week issued by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation has a warning about electric reliability this summer. It says 2/3 of North America faces reliability challenges in the event of widespread heat waves. And I've seen some reports that would include something like 165 million people. Alicia, can you give us a sense of what is behind this and how worried should Americans be as we kick off summer with Memorial Day and start getting these hot temperatures that are going to cause people to crank up their AC?
So last year, actually, the NERC, which is for short, issued a similar report warning about 2/3 of the country could face reliability challenges depending on what the weather is. So this report, in some ways, it's a little more grave. In some ways, it's a little less. It actually says that certain areas of the country are in a better position than they were last year. For example, California is in a better position than it was last year because it has more hydropower, and the storms that really hit the state this winter improved its hydropower, which can contribute 10 to 15% of its supply and is able to kind of ramp up on demand in the evenings when the sun goes down. So it's known as kind of a dispatchable power source. So California is in a better position. Some areas in the Midwest are in a better position because the transmission line that was under construction last year is back up. But in some ways, actually, the NERC's warning is actually a little more grave because you've had more coal and natural gas plants closed down in the last year. And some of that is because of regulation. Some of that is just because they're having trouble competing with heavily subsidized renewables. And I would actually add nuclear plants have also closed down, and those provide a steady baseload source of power. And so some areas of the country, particularly in the Midwest, may actually experience more issues. Texas, again, two areas of the country last summer that actually almost experienced blackouts were California. They had to resort to some emergency measures, and Texas, which also had to call or lean on businesses to reduce their operations at a certain point last July. Now, Texas has actually, increased its solar generation and its wind generation in the last year. But the problem with that is, of course, that you can't count or rely on solar and wind in summer. And actually, in the summer, there are a lot of really hot, still days. And that's a refrain you see across the report, is that there should be ample power unless there's no wind. And because wind in particular in the Midwest and Texas is generating a larger and larger share of the power, it's making the grid more vulnerable when you have those kinds of days, which often occur in the summer. And so Texas, is the worry there is that you could have more of these really hot, still days. And if there were to, say, a few natural gas plants overheat, and that actually does happen, is that some fossil fuel and or even nuclear plants will have issues when it gets really hot, in part because they're ramping up and have to produce so much power. And if a few of those go down, then you may either have to, again, lean on businesses to cut back, or there could be power outages.
But that framing will be fine unless we have a whole bunch of hot, still days. Strikes me as a pretty big unless. And for many people, a power outage, even if it goes on for hours or a day or a couple days, is an inconvenience. But for others, it's much more than that. I mean, if you're someone who relies on medical equipment to stay alive, a power outage could be catastrophic. And the point about the advantage of fossil fuel power is when you have a break in the sun or in the wind like that, you can turn the dial up on the natural gas plant or the coal plant, and you can fill that need. And Kim, seems to me that some of this transition that we're going through in terms of electric power is predicated on storage technologies, battery technologies that don't exist or are not in place yet at the very least. And so I get that NERC has been saying this for a while now. There have been other reports issued also by some grid operators saying similar things. and it gets very little attention. But I'm wondering if we are just walking into a really big problem that could shake up the political environment this summer if we get that kind of a blackout.
Yeah, of course we are. Look, this is entirely predictable. And no one can say that they aren't being warned about it. As you note, NERC has been putting out these warnings. Everybody in the power industry understands the problem, what's going on. Alicia just described some of this, but we've got renewables that are being heavily subsidized by government. It's closing down the necessary backup fossil fuel plants we need because they can't compete. I think that right now, for various reasons, something like a quarter of our current coal-fired power is set to go offline over the next 5 years. And yet we have an administration that just put out new power plan rules that would essentially make it impossible to bring on new natural gas or other fossil fuel plants that are, again, necessary backups for these renewables until we one day magic up the ultimate storage facility, which we are many years from being able to do. This isn't going to work. And the other thing that I think is very concerning is that while we are sort of slow walking every year, this is becoming more and more problematic. Once this moment happens, and once you have these massive blackouts across the country, there's no quick fix to this, okay? It takes a long time for a power plant to go offline, and it takes a long time to get one back on. So yeah, let's hope it does draw some attention, because one of the most mystifying things to me is that this administration can just keep putting out these ideas and policies and catering to the progressive left and in a way that's totally unrooted from reality and practical needs. And at some point, that practicality is going to hit the wall, and Americans are going to be hugely inconvenienced, if not worse, and somebody's going to have to answer for it.
Alicia, we'll give you the last word, but it seems to me there are also a bunch of knock-on effects if people start to get the feeling that the electrical power that they've been relying on is not going to be there always when they flip the light switch. One of those just might be different arrangements in how people run their businesses, whether they keep more inventory on hand, whether they keep less inventory on hand, whether if it's frozen or refrigerated stuff that they're selling, and investments that are basically losses because they're investing against something that shouldn't have to happen. And another one is generators. There have been news stories about people in California where there have been blackouts and brownouts due to wildfires, buying backup generators, and a lot of them run on gasoline. And then you're transitioning to green power and the power goes out and everybody fires up their gasoline generator, which is hardly efficient either. And so, Alicia, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but it strikes me as a real problem if one of the basic functions of government, which is to keep the power on, it starts to look and feel like to people like it's optional.
Well, there's a school of thought on the left that the electricity is a luxury and that we need to discourage consumption. People use more electricity because some households have two refrigerators. People just need to consume less. That we need to get used to having smaller homes, using less air conditioning, keeping your thermostat at 78 because humans are essentially menaces to the environment. I'd also point out, just on your point on the electric generators, that is an issue in California. They were actually sold out a year or two ago when there were wildfires, and all of a sudden all the utilities were having to cut power because of high winds and the threat to the grid. And so there's actually been a pretty high demand for emergency generators in California, though, of course, the state has now banned them. There's a phase-in period, but another 5 or 6 years, you will not be able to get them. So get them while you can. California is encouraging people instead to buy batteries. And in fact, it's now considering a mandate that electric vehicles in the state come with two-way charging. And what this is essentially is that the electric vehicles, Teslas, Ford, F-150s, be able to remit the power that they store back to the grid. So that is perhaps a selling point for some of these electric vehicles in California. Well, that you may be able to either run your home if the power goes out But on the other hand, it may be essentially confiscated by the states in order to keep the entire grid up. It's definitely a business burden in a way, but it's also a business opportunity for some of these companies like Tesla, which is just making a killing selling its batteries, and both batteries to homeowners to keep their power on when there's blackouts, but also to the grid. And Tesla, again, is one of the biggest manufacturers of these, grid scale batteries. And so in a way, it's actually just a payoff to these renewable companies, which, by the way, are also receiving heavy or huge subsidies under the Inflation Reduction Act.
Thank you, Kim and Alicia. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.